The rhythmic hum of the school bus always had a way of lulling me into a reflective mood. Today was no different. As I nestled into the familiar seat I had occupied countless times before, I couldn't help but let my mind drift back to a chapter of my past that seemed to reappear whenever I least expected it. Henry. The name itself conjured a flood of memories, each one vivid and tinged with the bittersweet hue of nostalgia. It was a day in early September, the leaves still clinging to their green and the air warm with the promise of a new school year. I was in 7th grade, a nervous newcomer to the bus route, clutching my backpack like a lifeline. The bus had a way of making new students feel both isolated and part of something larger. That day, however, was different. It was the day I first saw Henry. Henry was an 8th grader, a year older and, in the eyes of a 7th grader, infinitely cooler. He had this aura about him, an enigmatic blend of confidence and rebelliousness that drew attention. It wasn't long before I heard the whispers that surrounded him. Henry, the bad boy with a reputation for making waves. His name was often followed by hushed conversations about his antics, his escapades, and his charm that was said to be impossible to ignore. My first encounter with him was nothing short of memorable. I had just boarded the bus and was scanning for a place to sit when I spotted an empty seat near the middle. Clutching my backpack tightly, I took the seat, hoping to blend in. As I settled in, I could feel a pair of eyes boring into me. I glanced up and saw him, Henry, lounging at the back of the bus with a nonchalant air that suggested he owned the place. "Hey, new girl," he called out, his voice cutting through the ambient noise of the bus. "Lost or just always look like that?" The bus erupted in laughter, and my face flushed with embarrassment. I felt a rush of adrenaline, but instead of shrinking back, I met his gaze with a defiant stare. "I'm exactly where I need to be. Maybe you should mind your own business." For a moment, his smirk faltered, and I saw surprise flicker in his eyes. I had managed to catch him off guard. From that day on, our interactions became a daily ritual. Each morning, we engaged in a playful battle of wits. He'd throw a sarcastic remark my way, and I'd retaliate with a comeback that made him pause. It was an unspoken game, one that neither of us seemed willing to end. Despite the banter on the bus, our interactions at school were minimal. We rarely crossed paths outside of our morning exchanges. I was in 7th grade, and he was in 8th. Our worlds rarely intersected, save for the occasional nod in the hallways or the fleeting glances we exchanged. But on that bus, we were adversaries, playful and intense, a strange dynamic that neither of us seemed ready to abandon. As time went on, I began to notice subtle signs that hinted at something deeper. Henry's behavior started to change in ways I couldn't ignore. He would scowl if he saw me talking to another guy, his eyes narrowing with an intensity that made my heart race. I pretended not to notice, but inside, I was thrilled. The prospect of his jealousy, however misplaced, was exhilarating. And on the days when he didn't engage with me, a peculiar heaviness settled over me, a sense of absence that lingered long after the bus ride was over. One incident stands out in my memory. I was walking past Henry's classroom when I overheard a group of students whispering, "Look, that's Henry's girl." My cheeks burned with embarrassment, but a smile tugged at my lips. His girl. The idea was both exhilarating and terrifying, a blend of pride and fear that I struggled to reconcile. Then there was the day someone made a joke at my expense. The specifics of the joke have long since faded from memory, but I recall Henry's reaction vividly. Without missing a beat, he said, "Yeah, she's my girlfriend, so watch what you say." The room fell silent, and I stared at him, wide-eyed. He didn't glance my way, maintaining his usual cool demeanor, but I understood in that moment that what we had was more than just a playful rivalry. But as quickly as it had begun, it seemed to come to an end. Summer arrived, and I boarded the bus with a mixture of anticipation and dread, hoping to see Henry. Each day, his seat remained conspicuously empty. Days turned into weeks, and I began to worry. I asked his classmates about him, and they casually mentioned that his parents had sent him to a boarding school due to his rowdy behavior. Rowdy behavior. It sounded like something Henry would do, but I knew there had to be more to him than that. The realization hit me with a force that left me reeling. He was gone, just like that, and I hadn't even had the chance to say goodbye. I didn't have his number or any way to reach out. He was simply gone. For years, I tried to find him. I scoured Facebook, asked around, but it was as if he had vanished into thin air. Maybe he had moved on with his life, forgotten about me, but I could never forget him. He was my first love, the first boy to make my heart race and my mind spin with the confusion of burgeoning emotions. Even now, I find myself wondering where he is and what he's doing. I think back on those days with a mix of nostalgia and longing. There were moments when I was convinced I would never get over him. I would lie awake at night, replaying our bus rides in my mind, savoring the way his eyes would light up when he teased me. I would search for traces of him in the faces of strangers, hoping that one day I would stumble upon him and he would remember me. As the years passed, life moved on, as it tends to do. I graduated from high school, went to college, and began to build my own life. I experienced love and heartbreak, joy and sorrow. Through it all, the memory of Henry remained a poignant reminder of my first foray into the complex world of emotions. He was a chapter in my life that, while brief, left an indelible mark. Sometimes, I would catch a glimpse of a familiar bus or hear a name that echoed from my past, and I would be transported back to those days. I would imagine Henry, years older and wiser, reminiscing about the girl who stood up to him on that bus all those years ago. It was a comforting thought, one that brought a bittersweet smile to my face. And so, here I am, sitting on this bus once more, no longer the anxious 7th grader, but still carrying the echoes of that youthful romance. The bus is a vessel of memories, a time capsule of who I was and who I've become. As the scenery outside blurs by, I'm reminded of the beauty in looking back and cherishing the moments that have shaped us. In the end, Henry will always be a part of my past, a reminder of what it felt like to experience the exhilarating rush of first love. Though the details of our story are faded with time, the emotions remain as vivid as ever. And perhaps that's enough.